Tonight's question can be derived from looking at what other states are doing. Those states which have chosen to cut budgets rather than to find additional revenues now have the very largest deficits. And the classic examples are our neighbors to the east and to the west. Texas, which is facing over a $12 billion budget gap, one of the largest as a percentage of its overall revenue, and the one that Mr. Gessing cited as an example of a state without income tax, is languishing. They don't know how they're going to balance their budget this year because they've attempted over the last several years to only cut taxes. Of course, that makes them attractive to business, but it also leaves them unable to finance the basics of education and healthcare. Arizona, to our east, is facing even bigger, more massive deficits than that as a percentage of their state's revenue. Those budget deficits, they're now attempting to make up with cuts in Medicaid. For example, turning down all requests for life-saving operations, and we've seen some highlighted in the press recently. That's one path that people would have us follow. Cut your way into a downward death spiral in which each cut in the public sector elicits a concomitant cut in the private sector. When you cut the public sector, when you lay off public workers, when you cut their salaries, when you end contracts, you're not helping the private sector. That just reduces the economic activity that's available to the private sector. That's what our opponents would have you think would be the path to follow. That's the path that Texas has followed, downward. That's the path that Arizona has followed, downward. We can't do that. Neither do we have to raise taxes on New Mexicans. There is no need to raise taxes on New Mexicans across the board, as we've seen and we've heard reiterated. There are plenty of loopholes or breaks or gaping chasms in our tax structure right now that only need to be addressed. For example, we now know that if we would simply tax automobile sales at the gross receipts tax level instead of at a special tax level, and incidentally, that's 3%. The gross receipts tax level would be 7%. The municipalities would get some of that. The state excise tax on new automobile sales is 3%. We could go to the gross receipts tax level, and that would still be lower than our neighboring states. We wouldn't be competitively at a disadvantage, and that simple act would raise in excess of $100 million of additional revenue. The cuts that are being proposed are out of the lowest income New Mexicans. Child care, TANF benefits, domestic violence services, grads program for pregnant teens. Those are precisely the areas that we shouldn't be cutting. We don't have to raise taxes across the board to avoid it. All we have to do is plug some of the glaring loopholes. The governor recognizes that, hence her attack on the movie credits. We'll come back to that in a little while. Thank you very much.
Team 2.